Hello, and welcome to this enhanced podcast from Enlightening Science, the outreach wing of the Newton Project at Sussex University. We're dedicated to providing resources to help improve the understanding of Isaac Newton, his importance to both his own time and ours, his influence and his thought. My name's Pete Langman, and today I'm going to talk to you about the experimental lecturers of the 18th century. The experiments that this resource contains are generally not Newton's own, but those of the experimental lecturers who followed him and sought to spread the word of Newtonian philosophy. In fact, while Newton experimented on his own in order to make his discoveries, he was particularly scathing with regards to the need to show the public these experiments to prove his theories. After all, he did that with his mathematics. What possible reason might the average man have not to believe him? The principle behind the lectures, and especially their use of machinery, was simple. It was generally considered that the mathematics involved in Newton's Principia Mathematica was too complex for the average man or woman on the street. Indeed, even philosophers such as Huygens, Leibniz and Malebranche were reported to have difficulties with it. One reader wrote, "I tried to understand it. I read and reread what he had to say concerning the subject, but I could not understand a thing." Indeed, a Cambridge undergraduate was reported to have said on spotting Newton walking through the college, "Here goes a man who wrote a book neither he nor anybody else can understand." But the principles of physics which Newton established in both the Principia and the Optics did provide a real alternative to the orthodoxy as represented by René Descartes. The problem with disseminating Newton's works was, however, the intractable mathematics, as Desaguliers wrote in the preface to his course of experimental philosophy. The thoughts of being obliged to understand mathematics have frightened a great many from the Newtonian philosophy. But since machines have been contrived to explain and prove experimentally what Sir Isaac Newton has demonstrated mathematically, and several of his own experiments are shown in public courses, a great many persons get a considerable knowledge of natural philosophy by way of amusement, and some are so well pleased with what they learn that way as to be induced to study mathematics, by which they at last become eminent philosophers. Naturally, they didn't lecture from the goodness of their hearts, but charged for their services, and they published books to accompany their courses. As Benjamin Martin points out in the preface to his course of 1743, "The reason of my printing these lectures is that they might be in the hands of my subscribers, to peruse not only while they attend my lectures, but after the course is finished, to retain and fix those fleeting ideas which they acquire from a transient view of such a multiplicity of subjects and experiments." Naturally, they also knew when they had a captive market. There were several experimental philosophers, as they called themselves: John Keel at Oxford, John Theophilus Desaguliers, who acted as Newton's assistant amongst other things, William Grafzander, who lectured at the University of Leiden. Other English lecturers included Benjamin Martin, William Whiston and his demonstrator Francis Hauksbee. Just to give you an idea of the way they went about their business, let's have a quick look at Hauksbee and Whiston's course of mechanical, optical, hydrostatical and pneumatical experiments of 1715. The title page reads as follows: "To be performed by Francis Hauksbee, and the explanatory lectures read by William Whiston, M.A." The same page gives a day-by-day breakdown of what will be covered in the 26-day course. After the breakdown, we can see the following. Every subscriber is to pay 2.5 guineas, 1 guinea at the time of subscription, and the remainder the third day after the courses began. Subscriptions are taken in at Mr. Whiston's at the lower end of Cross Street, Hatton Garden, and at Mr. Hauksbee's house in Crane Court near St. Dunstan's Church in Fleet Street, where the course is to be performed. What follows is an advertisement explaining the new machines and bearing these more important lines. All the above-mentioned instruments, according to their latest and best improvements, are made and sold by Francis Hauksbee, the nephew of the late Mr. Hauksbee, deceased, in Crane Court near Fetter Lane in Fleet Street, London. At every stage, the lectures were a business. This text was also well suited to the lecture hall, as there was plenty of room to make notes. Readers would write all manner of stuff on their books: scientific diagrams, explanations of various principles, passages from other books, even shopping lists. So, let's just have a whistle-stop tour of some of the main players in the experimental lecture world, and these are lecturers, demonstrators and instrument makers. The lines were not always clearly drawn. Dr. John Keel, 1671 to 1721. The first to try to make Newton's ideas more intelligible through experimental demonstration in his lectures at Oxford. Kiel also defended Newton ferociously from the attacks launched by his rival Leibniz, to the point of publicly accusing him of plagiarism. John Theophilus Desaguliers, 1683 to 1744, one of the most influential of the experimental lecturers, Desaguliers established the standard syllabus for lecture courses, translated Gravesand's mathematical elements of natural philosophy, confirmed by experiments, into English, and acted as scientific advisor to the Duke of Chandos, leading to his involvement in schemes designed to improve London's water supply. Other works included the allegorical poem The Newtonian System of the World, the best model of government. Desaguliers assisted Newton as he sought to convince a delegation of French philosophers that his optical theory was correct. William Gravesande, 1688 to 1742. Initially trained as a lawyer, Gravesande met Newton in 1715 while part of a delegation sent to congratulate George III on his accession to the throne. He witnessed the demonstration given at the Royal Society by Desaguliers. He returned to Holland and became professor of experimental philosophy at Leiden University, partly on the recommendation of Newton himself. Francis Hauksbee, Jr. Instrument maker and lecturer, Hauksbee was the nephew of his namesake, Francis Hauksbee, also a well-known instrument maker who died in 1713. William Whiston, 1667 to 1752. Newton's successor as Lucasian Professor of Mathematics, Whiston was removed from his post due to his heretical ideas, namely the anti-Trinitarianism he shared with Newton. Whiston lectured with Francis Hauksbee and wrote works which sought to unite natural philosophy and theology, such as A New Theory of the Earth from its original to the consummation of all things. Benjamin Martin, writer, lecturer and maker of philosophical, mathematical and optical instruments. Martin was one of the more commercially minded philosophers. Joseph Priestley, 1733 to 1804. Another who, like Whiston, was involved in trying to unite natural philosophical and theological writings. Priestley also wrote many influential pedagogical works. Like most of the lecturers, Priestley was an active experimental scientist and as such is generally credited with the discovery of oxygen. Roger Coates, 1682 to 1716. Professor of astronomy and experimental philosophy at Cambridge, Coates edited the second edition of Newton's Principia, writing its preface after Newton refused to put pen to paper. George Adams died 1773. One of the best known of the instrument makers, in 1761 Adams was commissioned by George III to make a series of experimental machines with which the king could learn about the new philosophical knowledge and with which he could entertain his guests. Stephen de Mainbray, 1710 to 1782. Instrument maker and itinerant experimental lecturer, de Mainbray was eventually appointed superintendent of the observatory at Kew, where the king's collection was housed. Experimental philosophy was not inconsiderable business. Lectures, books and machines were all sold on the free market as the fashion for this new educational entertainment gathered strength. This enhanced podcast has been an enlightening science production from the University of Sussex. The sound recordist, editor and producer was Pete Langman.